So today you need to do lesson 4.2, and you should be able to finish all of that lesson and have time to do some independent reading. So you can go to modules, and you need to pull up lesson 4.2 instructions. Click next. You need to pull up L4.2. Click next again. And we are still using Joyous Veladorus. All right, so 4.2 is about introducing poems that praise. And your goals will be to analyze how an author's stylistic choices contribute to the effects of a work. Explain the relationship between poetry and prose, and incorporate specific language to achieve an intended tone. So this lesson acts as a bridge from the analysis of a literary essay, which is what you did in 4.1 at the end, to the analysis of poems that praise. So to begin, we're going to identify poetic language in Joyous Veladorus and use inductive reasoning to construct a definition of poetry based on your examples of poetic language. When you construct and share found odes from Joyous Veladorus reflecting on the structural and linguistic choices you made as you isolated and experimented with the poetic language embedded in the prose. And in the lesson's final reflective discussion, you will consider how the language you highlighted in your poems reflects Doyle's tone and awe and wonder for his subject matter. So there's a lot of things in this. It's very packed full of stuff, but like I said, you're able to finish it in one class period. Finding the poetry in the prose. So if you didn't know what a prose is, it's a written or spoken language in an ordinary form without metrical structure, like a short story. There's no random structure about it. It's just simply that. It's a paragraph, essay, full of paragraphs, complete sentences, so on and so forth. Poetry is a little different. And no, poetry does not have to rhyme. But typically poetry you find in stanzas, and it's got specific line breaks for specific reasons. So we need to define poetry to a sense. So, and I know y'all can easily go look up the word poetry, but we want a working definition of poetry based off what we see from Joyous Veladorus. So when we were analyzing the first paragraph of Joyous Veladorus, we discovered that Doyle had exercised his poetic license by transforming the noun nectar into the verb nectaring to describe one of the hummingbird's actions and also to continue the sound pattern, whirring and zooming and nectaring. So we're going to skim Joyous Veladorus again, noting other instances where Doyle exercised his poetic license or used poetic language. So this is where you're going to start in 4.2. You need to open up 4.2 and add those instances to the bulleted points. Be prepared to share your findings in class. Obviously, you're not going to do that because I'm not there today. But we will compile a collection for the whole class to see and add ideas. And I will add ideas in this video. So at least you get a little bit more extra options. So in here, this is the same prompt that's in 4.2 instructions. We're going to collect a list. So you need to have this pulled up with your bullet list ready, and you need to have Joyous Veladorus up. So now I'm going to magnify my stuff here real quick. So if I just skim over this first paragraph, I'm looking for poetic language or poetic license. So, of course, they talked about this whirring, zooming, and nectaring. So I can easily pull that over. And it says Hummer time zones. I know what a time zone is. And I know I've looked at a lot of time zones when like I set my phone or I set my computer or I set something. It's like, what time zone are you in? You want to set your right time zone. And we go visit my brother-in-law and his family because they have kids our own age as well, or kids that are my kids' ages. And they live right where you go from Eastern to Central time. So every time we go visit, we have to set our clocks back. As we come home, we have to put our clocks forward. So I know time zones. A Hummer time zone. There's no such thing as Hummer time zone. So he fabricates as his own time zone. So because that's fabricated, it's not a real thing. It's almost like poetic license. He's made something up to help better his writing and his ideas of what he's trying to convey. And little things like a little small alliterations. I love those. Hearts hammering. And it does have the same kind of, ing format that he was going with, but this is H and H. So that's an alliteration. So that's what you're doing. So what you're going to do in the video is I would say to give yourself about a minute to skim, maybe even 30 seconds, just skim. You're just looking for certain specific poetic license, stuff that you know is not true, but he's using it in a certain way, and poetic language. And you're going to pull over a few things over here. So pause the video, give yourself a minute, and then come back to the video, and I will show you a few things that I have found. I'm only going to show you maybe one or two. Pull as much as you want to pull, so you have plenty to pull from for the next piece. All right, so welcome back, and let's look through paragraph 2 together now. Most of this stuff is pretty, I know it says 1,000 flowers. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I mean, as fast as they fly, there's a high possibility. Why not? But most of this stuff is quite factual. And I'm looking for words that more or less praise. So I want really positive stuff here. So barely beating, as much as I like it, I'm going to leave it. I think I've pulled it over before, but I'm starting to get a little bit more picky now. Okay, so what I do like is Thunderous Wild Hearts. And I like brilliant music. Even though it said stilled, I can just take the brilliant music part because I can make that sound praising. And he is kind of praising them, even though it's kind of sad where he's saying it's being stilled. But he's calling them brilliant music. All right, so same thing. Again, give yourself only about a minute, skim, add a few things to your 4.2, pause the video, and then come back. All right, so paragraph 3. He's got a lot of adjectives here to describe metabolisms. I pull that. I like how he's talking about spending a heartbeat fast like a hummingbird. If you've got more, wonderful. If you like my two, add them. If you don't like them, don't add them. Paragraph 4. So same thing, pause the video and go find you a few and then come back. All right, so the first thing you probably should have really honed in on is this right here. Way bigger than your car. That is not the proper spelling of way, but he gets away with it because it's showing you just how much bigger this whale is than your car. So the fact that he added all these A's and you know for a fact that's not how you spell the word way, that's again poetic license to a point. He's not making up a word, but he is changing the spelling drastically. And I really do like piercing, yearning tongue. All right, so again, pause, give yourself about a minute, skim, pull a couple over, come back to the video. All right, so up here you have a lot of, again, varied almost factual stuff, very factual things here. So I would get with where he repeats kind of the whirring and swirling and whirling, because he said a lot of those same kind of words very close together. And a lot of people have chosen this one too, we all chum inside, because now he's linking all of us together and he's calling it chum inside of us instead of, liquid motion or blood or whatever. Last but not least, pause video, go find you a couple, come back and see what I pull as well. Okay, so there's been a lot of things pulled from this one over class time. I'm going to try to pick probably the best one. So this one's been a big one. A heart in a day, an hour, a moment. So taking that concept of time and bringing it shorter and shorter. And then a mother's papery ancient hand. I really get that one, and I'm going to give you one more from here as well. Ooh, wrong one. A child's apple breath. Like the way they're describing the child's breath and the mother's hand. And I can see those very clearly because I am a mother and I do have grandparents as well. And my grandparents they're very old. They're in their 90s. And bless their hearts, when they fall or something and they get cut, as bad as my grandfather has been cut, he cannot get stitches anymore. His skin is almost like paper. You can't stitch paper. So when they say a mother's papery ancient hand, I know almost exactly what they're talking about. My grandparents live on the same property I do, so when he needs to have his arm redressed because of a bad fall and he's got a cut on his arm, I'm the one who has to go redress it. Although I'm the teacher of the family and I'm not the nurse. Sometimes I do call the nurse though. I have a nurse in the family and I will call and say, hey, you're up. The teacher can't do this. All right, so the other thing I'm going to show you is to give yourself more space on your paper. If you want to select, that's all I did was I selected, I clicked and I held. And I go to Format. I go to Columns. I'm going to go to 2 columns. And now I have more space to work with. I like having more space. So I'm going to go back to 4.2 to give yourself some hints. All right. So based on our list, what is our working definition of poetry? And I know we pulled this list from an essay, but these are his poetic languages, his poetic license. When he used these words, he wasn't trying to be constrained to an essay and write some very informative piece. So here's your hint. You should recognize that there's a certain freedom with words in which Doyle indulges. He grants himself the authority to break the rules of more traditional prose. He defies traditional spelling, so he can use the word way to emphasize the size of the blue whale. He fabricates a time zone for hummingbirds, and he describes a child's breath as apple and a mother's hand as papery. So think about that word freedom and some of the other things that you could probably think of when you look at these groupings of words. These words have a very, I'm going to change the font color to this, a very creative tone. We're going to use that word freedom. Very descriptive. A lot of imagery is here as well. So based off this hint, these words, how can you create a working definition? So you could think of when writing poetry, and I know it says poetry right here, but you could put something on the lines of more creative writing that's less constrained to traditional formats. That sounds very definition-like, but I want you to give it your shot and write it the best way you can. A working definition based off the kind of language we pulled from that prose. I'm going to give you need to only take about 2 to 3 minutes to write this and come back. Okay, so it has been established that Doyle exercises a certain degree of rule breaking and playfulness with individual words and phrases. So does he also exercise these same traits when he's making a structural choice? So when we think structural choice, we're thinking about how it's been built. And he's used the form of an essay, a prose. So to answer that question, you need to ask yourself other questions. Are all Doyle's sonnets complete? Yes, they are. They're all some of them are long and lengthy, but they are all complete sentences. There's no fragments or run-ons. Are there any line breaks? Besides paragraph breaks? No, there's no single line breaks. And is each paragraph focused? Yes, it is. So based off those answers, when you talk about Doyle's essay displays versus being more traditional or that of a poetic structure, although he's using poetic language, he does have a more traditional structured essay. It's complete sentences, there's no line breaks, and each paragraph has a focus. So let's consider the structural differences between traditional prose and traditional poetry. As a writer of prose, Doyle sticks to writing in sentences and paragraphs. If he were writing a poem, would he still do so? Probably not. So then what constitutes a line of poetry? A line of poetry can be one word. It can be 3 to 4 to 5 words. Poetry is very creative. And that's what makes sometimes it's hard for others to do because they want a specific way to do things. Like how many, what am I writing? Am I writing a sentence or a paragraph? If I tell you writing a sentence, you know where to stop. If I want 2 sentences, you know where to stop. If I want a paragraph, you know what to do. But when I say a line of poetry, that could be one word. It could be a couple words. So you really need to use your creativity here. All right. Explaining the concept of a found essay. While Joyous Veladora is considered an essay, it was originally woven throughout a chapter of a book by Brian Doyle called The Wet Engine, Exploring the Mad, Wild Miracle of the Heart. A book Doyle wrote while raising a young son who was born with only 3 chambers in his heart. If you turn to the chapter in the book called Joyous Veladores, you will discover that Doyle did not simply just pluck 6 paragraphs out intact and present them as an essay. Instead, he used parts of the chapter and formed a new essay from some of the language he had originally used in the longer work. So, in this way, it's what you call a found essay. He found all of this information from a chapter in his book. And again, it wasn't like he went to that chapter and grabbed the first 6 paragraphs, the last 6 paragraphs, or the middle 6 paragraphs. He picked and chose what to pull to form this essay, although all the words were already right there for him. So that leads us to composing found odes. So for the next part of the lesson, you will be granted poetic license to compose a found poem in praise of one of Doyle's subjects. It could praise the hummingbird, the blue whale, the heart, etc. And since an ode is a type of poem often written in praise or celebration of its subject, you could consider your found poem as a found ode. If this helps you, please read it. I hope it helps. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. It's just there for extra help. So you're going to follow these directions to create your found poem. Reread Joyous Validorus, underlining or annotating language that you feel expresses praise, awe, or wonder for one of Doyle's subjects. Choose one of those subjects to focus on. You can do these backwards if you want. I don't care. So again, you may want to focus on the hummingbird, or just the hummingbird's heart, the blue whale, the human heart, etc. Copy the language, words, phrases, and lines that you may potentially use in your found poem on a fresh sheet of paper, leaving plenty of room in between lines so you can study the language easily. Cut. Eliminate any words that seem unnecessary, do not sound quite right, or are distracting from your poem's focus. You are not allowed to add your own language. You have to work with the language you found. You have the freedom to repeat the language, change punctuation, change capitalization, change line breaks, and exercise. And experiment with spacing of words. My son walked in and I got distracted. And then read it aloud. You don't have to do this part, but it does help. Read aloud your found poem, pausing briefly at the line breaks and any punctuation, commas, semicolons, periods. If something sounds wrong, tweak the line breaks and or spacing. So, basically saying you're going to come over here to Joyous Validorus, and you're going to look for, where's that praise, which we kind of did up here. I kind of geared you to do that up here. So if I know I want to write about the blue whale, I'm going to pull something from here. If I want to write about the hummingbird's heart, I can pull anything from here. Or even this right here. So you can pull as much or as little as you want, as long as you can turn it into a poem. Now this one, I won't have to remove so much. So, thunderous wild heart the size of an infant's fingernail. So now I have to create line breaks. Thunderous, wild, heart. The size of an infant's fingernail. That's probably the easiest one you can do. And I've already taken it from you, sorry. But simply put that way, I pulled a line over one phrase from a sentence. And I took it and I broke it up to turn it into my own little poem, Thunderous, Wild Heart, the size of an infant's fingernail. And I'm praising that of the hummingbird's heart. So then I can even title this, I can even title it Ode to the Hummingbird's Heart. And that could be the title of my poem, because it is a poem of praise. And it's all about the hummingbird's heart. So you can have as little or as much, but it needs to make sense to a point. When you read this and look at it as a poem, but you read it how it should be read, thunderous, wild heart, the size of an infant's fingernail, you understand what's being said. So if you read your poem or somebody else reads your poem for you, so, if you want to have a friend double check your stuff and it doesn't make sense, you need to either take some words away, add some words, add a different line break, make it make sense to a point. I know a lot of poems are very elusive and they're hard to understand, but when you break a lot of the greater poems down, they do make sense. So the last thing you have is a reflection. And that's also here in the instructions. And that sample, it says each thunderous wild heart, the size of it. So here's the example I was talking about, an example of how that person reflected on their found ode. So as you have observed, composing a found poem entails making lots of decisions about what words to cut and what words to keep. So while constructing your found poem, what were the words and phrases you refused to cut? Why were you drawn to those particular words and phrases? Why did you consider them essential? And then what words did you decide to cut and why? What other decisions did you make while constructing your found poem? So that is it. That is the end of 4.2. Again, you have plenty of time to do this for this class. At this point, you should be working on your constructed poem and then doing your reflection. Whatever time is remaining, please make sure you get your independent book out and do some reading. I'm sorry I'm not there today, but I'm glad I was able to get you this video to get this work in so we don't lose headway. And I hope y'all have a great day.